Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. So, after 40 days and becoming the longest government shutdown in American history, the government shutdown seems to be over. And I would have thought that would sound like good news, but it really doesn't feel like it. Late Sunday night, 8 Democratic senators broke ranks with their fellow Democrats, and decided to come to Republicans with votes enough to break the shutdown. To many more progressive Democrats in Congress, and to most Democrats here on the outside, this felt like a betrayal and a waste, because now the shutdown felt like it was for nothing, and seemed to prove once again that no matter what, no matter how hard the Democrats hold out, Donald Trump and the Republicans always get their way. Senators Angus King of Maine, Tim Kaine of Virginia, Dick Durbin of Illinois, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire, Catherine Cortez Macedo of Nevada, and Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada all voted to reopen the government by voting for the Republican stopgap measures. Understandably, their promises to vote with Republicans to reopen the government feels like a complete betrayal. Democrats had been winning the messaging fight. The majority of people were absolutely blaming Republicans and the Republican-led government for this shutdown. And following big wins in last week's election, Democrats were riding high. It felt like they could really stand strong for as long as it took to get what they wanted from this shutdown. But Democrats and standing united and strong, understandably, wasn't going to last forever. One of the big issues that was there from the beginning is the fact that the Democratic Party isn't entirely united on anything. From the start, they were Democratic senators who didn't want to shut down the government at all. Or if the government was shut down, they didn't feel like putting it all on the Affordable Care Act subsidies being extended was worth the fight. So from that perspective, it was always a question of how long could those senators hold out before they lost their will and decided to simply cave just to get it to be over. And of those 8 senators who broke the ranks with Democrats, none are facing re-election and 2 are planning on retiring at the end of their term. They have no reason to fear being primaried or any sort of real risk to their personal political careers. The prevailing sentiment among those 8 senators was that the government shutdown is hurting people enough, and they just didn't feel continuing to fight and hold out was worth it. But to many, they seem to have been shown to be weak when they needed to be strong. This sort of capitulation to Republican demands basically feels like a giving up and giving in, leaving Democrats with nothing to show for all the fight they put in those 40 days. So hold strong and get what they needed from the Republicans. And that's how a lot are feeling right now. Like this was all for nothing. All this pain, all this suffering for nothing. Republicans still win in the end. As a result, there's even calls for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to be removed from his position, saying this is a failure not only of the party as a whole, but him specifically as being incapable of holding the party together and pushing for this singular goal of ensuring health care for all Americans. While removing Chuck Schumer would feel like a small symbolic victory, ultimately it would be fairly pointless, so I don't really see that happening, especially because Chuck Schumer himself has been vehemently against voting with Republicans on the very things that these other 8 senators agreed to vote with them on. But even in spite of that fact, many see Chuck Schumer as the captain of the ship that is the Democratic Party. So this failure is his failure, and he has to suffer the consequences of that failure. I think one of the reasons this agreement to negotiate with Republicans feels like such a failure is because it's dependent on Republicans negotiating in good faith and honestly considering giving Democrats some of the things they want, and it really feels like there's no way they'll do that. Oh, sure, we'll vote to extend health care, says Republicans, while looking up and having their fingers crossed behind their back. It's asking to trust a group of people who we know for a fact to be untrustworthy and to renege on their promises. And as a result, a lot of people are very angry about this, and they absolutely should be. This feels like a loss, like the Democrats did what they do best, and they folded when they needed to be strong the most. And while I absolutely feel that way and agree with that feeling, I'm not sure it's quite that simple. While Democrats definitely could and did stand on principle and standing up for the values that they believed in, the honest truth is that this shutdown couldn't go on forever. And with people out there literally starving without their SNAP benefits, the question was starting to feel like not how long can congressional Democrats hold out, but how long could the rest of the people hold out? With the government shut down and nothing being funded, people were being left in really bad positions. And while they were definitely starting to blame Republicans for that fact, they couldn't subsist on being mad at Republicans. It was getting to a point that many were just not going to be able to survive if the government kept being shut down and Democrats and Republicans were stuck in a deadlock. If they're just starving, they may not care which political party is the one that holds the most amount of blame. All they know is that they're suffering and no one is coming to help them. But it's in that maybe there is some silver lining to this Democratic capitulation. Republicans had made it abundantly clear that they had no problem allowing the people to starve and suffer. To a point, they were actually trying to get states to reverse aid that they were going to distribute to their people. So it's possible that this reopening of the government through democratic negotiation may be seen as the Republicans were willing to let you starve, but we Democrats were not. So while it definitely feels bad to seemingly give in to Republicans, maybe it won't be all bad. I think one thing that was clear from the start of this shutdown was that Republicans had no interest in backing down, ever. They would rather see the country burn and collapse around them than to ever be seen giving in to Democrats, even a little bit. So it's very possible that even if Democrats had managed to stay strong together for longer, all that would really have achieved is extending the length of the shutdown, but not having achieved anything more than they've achieved at this point. People were theorizing that the government would be shut down at least until the start of next year, and some were even saying maybe the government will never reopen. And while I myself was never quite on board with the government will stay closed forever, it remaining shut down at least until the start of 2026 did seem like a realistic possibility. And I knew there were scores of people that would literally not survive to see the end of that shutdown if that had been the case. So if they knew that Republicans would never come to the table for real negotiations with the Democrats, and seemingly the most they could achieve was just a longer shutdown, given how much genuine suffering this shutdown was causing the American people, possibly seeing it reopen before the end of 2025 is possibly a mercy. And while failing to hold the line honestly feels awful right now, I guess at least we saw that for 40 days Democrats were able to stay strong and united, which is something they have never been historically very good at. Honestly, it was becoming very clear that as much as we wanted them to, Republicans were never going to be the ones to blink first on this shutdown. It was obvious they did not care at all the consequences that this was having, the pain they were causing, the suffering that was resulting. As we saw during the COVID times, they are perfectly willing to allow their constituents to die en masse, and they will not lose a moment of sleep over it. This 40-day government shutdown has shown once again that congressional Republicans do not value the lives of the people that they represent. So when you're fighting against a people who are literally willing to watch their own people die and suffer, how do you fight that? You can hold strong against them, but for how long? When they just don't care? I really don't know. And that is the question that congressional Democrats are faced with this entire government shutdown. Holding out and pushing back against Republicans was the right thing to do, but it wasn't something that they could honestly sustain indefinitely. And the longer the shutdown dragged, the harder it became. It started to feel like how long could Democrats watch their own people suffer and stand by? And not even just their own people, all the people, the American people. Just because they didn't vote blue doesn't mean that they should be left to starve and die. Democrats were in this for all Americans, not just blue Americans. The shutdown felt like they were holding the American people hostage, and the Democrats were the only ones not willing to let the hostages be killed. I'd often wondered, what was it going to take to end the shutdown? A plane literally falling out of the sky because air traffic controllers were pushed to their limits after over a month of working a high-stress job without any pay? A national tragedy that both sides of the political aisle could blame the other for being the cause of, and saying, well, this would never have happened if you hadn't just given in. But thankfully, it seems it never came to that. So if nothing else, we can at least count ourselves fortunate in that. I think there's a lot to criticize and be mad about, given the seeming whimper this shutdown is ending on. And while it definitely feels like Democrats have lost more than they gained in this shutdown fight, it's not as if this was the final battle. And it's helped to shed a real bright light on just how callous and uncaring the Republican Party is. And while the memory of some Republican voters is short, and by the time the midterms roll around next year, they will already have forgotten all this, not all will have. They'll remember how the Republicans in power let them twist in the wind and starve, literally taking food aid away from them at a time when they needed it the most. While giving in to Republicans definitely hurt Democrats amongst the more progressive section of the party, it's hard to argue that this shutdown didn't hurt Republicans far more overall than it hurt Democrats. The majority saw it for what it was, a Republican-led shutdown, and they will not quickly forget what it cost them. Democrats can at least claim a victory in that messaging battle. That's where we're left at the moment. The 40 days of pain and suffering may finally be over, and the costs were high on both sides. I think in the end that was how this was always going to go. No one was going to come out a real winner. It was all a question of who would lose less, though admittedly it's a little unclear as to who really lost. I'm prepared to say everybody lost. The Democrats lost, the Republicans lost, the American people lost. As much as we want good to always triumph over evil, the right to overcome the wrong, sometimes nobody wins. And that's how this is really feeling, like nobody really wins, and everybody just loses in their own way. I think the best thing to do in this moment is for Democrats to dust themselves off and just focus on the midterms of next year and defeating all Republicans that they possibly can and seizing back some power. They won big last week. They can win even bigger next November. This shutdown is not a defeat, and they should not treat it as such. Progressives are disappointed and angry, and they should be. But even if they see this as a battle lost, the war is still raging, and they can still come out as the victors. All is not lost. They should see this as a reason to fight more, to keep going, to not stop the momentum that they're feeling. Progress is possible, but it requires us to not take every setback as a failure and stop that motion forward. I understand the sentiment that Democrats didn't achieve enough in this shutdown fight, and that ultimately they just folded and gave in. But it's that focus on what didn't happen, and entirely dismissing and discounting what was achieved, that is really what halts their momentum. I really wanted them to do more too. It's what felt like the right thing to do. And good enough doesn't feel like good enough. But even small victories are better than no victories at all. But while it really doesn't feel like it, I think Democrats really did come out more the winners in this than not. Yes, maybe not specifically in the goals that they set out to win on, but they gave people brief glimpses of hope, which is something that they haven't had in what feels like a very, very long time. And that alone feels like a win. So I don't know what happens next, but I want very much to believe that this was all worth it and that things are going to get better. Some will say that it's just cope, but I like to think of it more as hope, and I much prefer to think of it that way. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news.